Together, we can make real, lasting change." As they parted ways, Angela reflected on how much had transformed in just a few short days. From feeling isolated and ready to give up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that could change not only St. Mary's, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those reluctant to embrace change. However, as Angela looked back at the hospital, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just a job, it was a calling, a chance to ensure that no healthcare professional would have to endure what she had experienced. With renewed purpose, Angela set off into the evening, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited her. The transformation at St. Mary's had begun, ushering in a new chapter in the fight for equality and inclusion in healthcare. In the months that followed Mr. Edwards's revelation, St. Mary's General Hospital underwent a remarkable transformation under Angela's leadership as Chief Diversity Officer. With Mr. Edwards's ongoing support, the previously toxic culture began to shift toward inclusivity and respect. The mandatory diversity and inclusion training, initially met with skepticism, gradually opened eyes and changed hearts. Dr. Thompson, following a comprehensive investigation, was dismissed from his role, sending a clear message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. As the changes at St. Mary's gained traction, Angela found herself in high demand as a speaker at medical conferences and diversity seminars. 1 year after Mr. Edwards' intervention, she stood before a packed audience at a national health care conference. "A year ago, I was a nurse on the brink of giving up," Angela began. "Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible and that one voice can make a difference." She shared the inspiring story of St. Mary's transformation, candidly addressing the challenges faced while also celebrating the victories. The lives touched, minds changed, and culture shifted. After the conference, Mr. Edwards, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Angela with a warm smile. "Angela," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed the progress at St. Mary's and its ripple effects across the healthcare industry. Mr. Edwards revealed that several other hospitals in the Healthcare United network had begun implementing similar programs. "You know, Angela," he said, "when I checked into St. Mary's after my skiing accident, I never could have imagined the journey it would set in motion. You've not only transformed St. Mary's, but also reignited my passion for this work." As Angela prepared to return to St. Mary's, she reflected on her incredible journey from an isolated, frustrated nurse to a leader and change-maker. She had come so far, and while the work was far from over, Angela felt a sense of hope and determination stronger than ever. Upon her return to St. Mary's, she was greeted by Sarah, once a distant colleague but now a strong ally. The hospital buzzed with renewed energy, staff members collaborating and communicating in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Angela paused before a new mural depicting a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together. A plaque below read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." As she settled into her office, ready to tackle new challenges, Angela smiled. The transformation of St. Mary's was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts, minds, and entire systems was ongoing, and she was ready for it all, committed to fighting for a truly inclusive healthcare system, one day at a time. What moment in Angela's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her perseverance in the face of discrimination, or perhaps Mr. Edwards's unexpected intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into crafting these inspiring stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going. I appreciate having you on this journey. She met Dr. Barrett's gaze steadily, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away. As Dr. Barrett walked away, a smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth, and Angela heard him mutter under his breath, "Let's see how she handles this." Throughout the day, Angela found herself racing from one difficult case to another, barely catching her breath. The patients assigned to her were among the most demanding in the hospital, many with complex medical needs and challenging personalities. Despite the overwhelming workload, Angela refused to let her standards slip, approaching each patient with the same level of care and professionalism, even as exhaustion began to set in. However, the constant pressure took its toll both physically and emotionally. As she rushed to respond to yet another call light, she overheard two of her colleagues whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're letting her handle all these critical cases?" one nurse said, her voice laced with disdain. "It's like they're just waiting for her to mess up." "I know," the other replied, "but you have to admit, it's impressive how she keeps going. I would have cracked by now." A mix of anger and hurt washed over Angela. The realization that her colleagues were not only aware of the unfair treatment, but were actively watching to see if she would fail, felt almost unbearable. As the day progressed, Angela found herself making more frequent trips to Mr. Edwards' room. Unlike the rest of the hospital, his room had become a sanctuary for her, a place where she could catch her breath and feel, if only for a moment, that someone recognized her true worth. "Good to see you, Nurse Clark," Mr. Edwards greeted her during a routine check. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Angela managed a weak smile. "Just a busy day, Mr. Edwards. Nothing I can't handle." Mr. Edwards studied her face for a moment, concern filling his eyes. "You know," he said carefully, "there's a difference between handling something and truly thriving. From what I've seen, you're more than capable of the latter." His kind words only highlighted the stark contrast between how Mr. Edwards treated her and how the rest of the hospital staff did. Angela felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of her isolation threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I appreciate your kindness." As she turned to leave, Mr. Edwards called out to her. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice filled with a quiet authority that made her pause. "Remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Angela left the room, her mind racing with thoughts and feelings. Each day at Riverside Hospital, as she boarded the bus, Naomi's mind swirled with emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first joined the staff seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by a grim determination to endure in this hostile environment. Yet, amid the turmoil, a small voice in the back of her mind insisted that something had to change. The question remained. Would she be the one to crack under the relentless pressure, or could her perseverance finally spark a shift in the toxic culture of Riverside? Little did Naomi know, an unexpected ally was on the verge of entering her life, one who could tip the scales in her favor and unearth the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered within Riverside General Hospital. As the bus rolled through the darkening streets, Naomi closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words and the legacy of resilience coursing through her veins. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Riverside with renewed resolve. She had spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of their background or her own struggles. As she approached the nurses' station, Naomi noticed a flurry of activity. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Naomi asked one of her colleagues, curious about the commotion. The nurse, momentarily forgetting her usual coolness toward Naomi, replied with excitement, "We've got a VIP patient coming in, a big shot who had a skiing accident. Both arms are broken, from what I heard." Before Naomi could inquire further, Dr. Barrett appeared, his expression stern. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice clipped, "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412. Mr. Thomas Edwards has suffered a severe skiing accident and has both arms broken. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Naomi nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was: another test. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away." As she made her way to room 412, a nagging feeling told her this assignment was different somehow. The importance surrounding this patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Naomi was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, he radiated a quiet authority that Naomi immediately recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Naomi Clark, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Edwards looked up at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Clark," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong despite his condition. "I appreciate your help. I must say, I didn't expect to end up here after my skiing accident." As Naomi began to check his vitals, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this patient would bring a change not only to her day, but also to the overarching challenges she faced at Riverside Hospital. Each day at Riverside Hospital, as she boarded the bus, Naomi's mind swirled with emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first joined the staff seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by a grim determination to endure in this hostile environment. Yet, amid the turmoil, a small voice in the back of her mind insisted that something had to change. The question remained: would she be the one to crack under the relentless pressure, or could her perseverance finally spark a shift in the toxic culture of Riverside? Little did Naomi know, an unexpected ally was on the verge of entering her life, one who could tip the scales in her favor and unearth the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered within Riverside General Hospital. As the bus rolled through the darkening streets, Naomi closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words and the legacy of resilience coursing through her veins. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Riverside with renewed resolve. She had spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of their background or her own struggles. As she approached the nurses' station, Naomi noticed a flurry of activity. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Naomi asked one of her colleagues, curious about the commotion. The nurse, momentarily forgetting her usual coolness toward Naomi, replied with excitement, "We've got a VIP patient coming in, a big shot who had a skiing accident. Both arms are broken, from what I heard." Before Naomi could inquire further, Dr. Barrett appeared, his expression stern. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice clipped. "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412. Mr. Thomas Edwards has suffered a severe skiing accident and has both arms broken. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Naomi nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was, another test. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away." As she made her way to room 412, a nagging feeling told her this assignment was different somehow. The importance surrounding this patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Naomi was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, he radiated a quiet authority that Naomi immediately recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Naomi Clark, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Edwards looked up at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Clark," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong despite his condition. "I appreciate your help. I must say, I didn't expect to end up here after my skiing accident." As Naomi began to check his vitals, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this patient would bring a change not only to her day, but also to the overarching challenges she faced at Riverside Hospital, never hinting at the prejudice Naomi had come to expect. One afternoon, while she was changing Mr. Edwards' bandages, she overheard a conversation outside the room that made her blood run cold. "I don't care what Dr. Barrett says," a nurse hissed. "I don't trust that Clark woman with our VIP patient. Who knows what she might do?" "I know," another voice agreed, "but we can't say anything. They'll just accuse us of being racist." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she finished her task, the weight of suspicion and mistrust pressing down on her. Mr. Edwards, ever observant, noticed her distress. "Is everything all right, Nurse Clark?" he asked, his voice gentle yet probing. Naomi forced a smile. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. Just concentrating on getting these bandages right." Mr. Edwards was silent for a moment, studying her face. "You know," he finally said, "I've always believed that a person's true character is revealed not in how they treat their superiors, but in how they treat those they perceive as beneath them." Startled by the pointed nature of his comment, Naomi looked up. Mr. Edwards held her gaze, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen a lot in my time, Nurse Clark, and I can tell you that the view from this bed has been illuminating." Before Naomi could respond, Dr. Barrett entered the room, cutting their conversation short. As she left, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Edwards was more than just a VIP patient. His words hinted at a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play at Riverside. For the first time since starting there, she felt a glimmer of hope. Little did she know, Mr. Edwards' presence was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Riverside General Hospital, exposing the deep-seated prejudices festering beneath its polished exterior. As the days wore on, Naomi found herself increasingly isolated at Riverside. The initial coolness from her colleagues had transformed into outright hostility, with whispered comments and pointed glares following her everywhere. Emboldened by the absence of consequences for his behavior, Dr. Barrett became more overt in his attempts to undermine her. One morning, as Naomi reviewed patient charts at the nurse's station, Dr. Barrett approached her with a stack of files. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I need you to handle these cases today. They're particularly challenging. I trust you're up to the task." Naomi looked at the pile, immediately recognizing it as nearly double the workload of her colleagues. Whirling with the implications of Mr. Edwards' words, Angela made her way back to the nurses' station, feeling an undercurrent of change in the air. Little did she know that the following day would unleash a series of events that would test her limits and lead to a confrontation that had been brewing since her first day at St. Mary's. The next morning, Angela arrived at work to find the hospital abuzz with heightened activity. Rumors circulated about a high-stakes emergency operation scheduled for later that day, with several board members and important visitors expected to observe. As Angela began her rounds, she couldn't help but notice the nervous energy permeating the hospital. Both nurses and doctors seemed on edge, the pressure of the impending operation weighing heavily on everyone's minds. Midway through her morning duties, Dr. Barrett approached Angela, a glint in his eye that immediately put her on guard. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "we need you to assist in the emergency operation this afternoon. It's a critical case, and I trust you're prepared to handle it." A mix of surprise and suspicion washed over Angela. Being asked to assist in such a high-profile operation was usually an honor, but given Dr. Barrett's demeanor, she couldn't shake the feeling that there might be an ulterior motive. "Of course, Dr. Barrett," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'll be ready." As Dr. Barrett walked away, Angela overheard him mutter to another doctor, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." The hours leading up to the operation flew by in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Angela threw herself into her work, double and triple checking everything to ensure she was as prepared as possible for whatever challenges the surgery might bring. When she scrubbed in, she couldn't ignore the skeptical glances from some of the other staff members. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Don't you dare let them see you falter." As the operation began, Angela found herself working alongside Dr. Barrett and several other senior staff members. The tension in the room was palpable, the knowledge that important observers were watching adding an extra layer of pressure. Despite the challenging circumstances, Angela remained focused, her movements precise and efficient. She anticipated the surgeon's needs, handing them instruments before they even asked, her years of training and experience shining through. However, as the operation progressed, Angela noticed something unsettling that made her heart race. Angela's heart raced as she observed Dr. Barrett, usually so confident, hesitating. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared for a critical incision. In that split second, she realized he was about to make a potentially life-threatening mistake. Without hesitation, she spoke up. "Dr. Barrett," she said, her voice clear and steady, "perhaps we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Angela. Dr. Barrett's face flashed with a mix of surprise and anger. For a moment, she feared he might dismiss her suggestion outright, but then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded and adjusted his approach. As the operation continued, it became clear that her intervention had likely saved the patient's life. As the surgery concluded successfully, Angela felt the weight of many eyes upon her. Some regarded her with newfound respect, while others, including Dr. Barrett, appeared to seethe with barely contained anger. As they began to clean up, Dr. Barrett turned to Angela, his voice low and menacing. "Nurse Clark, I need to see you in private. Now." Angela followed Dr. Barrett out of the operating room, her heart pounding. She knew she had done the right thing, but it might have just cost her job. Upon entering a private room, she was surprised to find it was Mr. Edwards' room. She had forgotten he was still a patient. However, Dr. Barrett seemed too angry to notice their location. As soon as the door closed behind them, he rounded on Angela, his face red with fury. "How dare you question my judgment in there?" he hissed, venom dripping from his voice. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? You're lucky I don't have you fired on the spot for such insubordination." Angela stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Doctor Barrett, I was simply doing my job." "Your job?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Your job is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in a prestigious institution like St. Mary's. You're here because of some misguided attempt at diversity, not because you have any real skill or knowledge." As Dr. Barrett's tirade grew increasingly racist and hostile, Angela felt a wave of anger and despair wash over her. Every slight and microaggression she had endured seemed insignificant compared to this blatant display of prejudice. Just as she was about to respond, a voice cut through the room, stopping Dr. Barrett mid-sentence. "Dr. Barrett," Mr. Edwards said, his voice filled with quiet authority that commanded attention. Both Angela and Dr. Barrett turned in surprise to see Mr. Edwards sitting up in his bed, anger etched on his face. "Mr. Edwards," Dr. Barrett stammered, paling as he realized the gravity of his mistake. "I didn't realize you were awake. I apologize for disturbing you." "Oh, I'm very much awake, Doctor." "Barrett," Mr. Edwards replied, his eyes narrowing, "and I've been awake long enough to observe the disgraceful way you and others in this hospital have treated Nurse Clark." Angela stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. The quiet, unassuming patient was suddenly radiating an aura of power and authority that filled the room. "Dr. Barrett," he continued, his voice steady, "I assure you, this isn't how we treat our staff, especially those who demonstrate true competence and care for their patients." Dr. Barrett opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The dynamic in the room had shifted, and Angela felt a surge of hope for the first time in a long while. "There's been no misunderstanding," Mr. Edwards interrupted sharply. "What I've witnessed during my stay here is a clear pattern of discrimination and harassment, and it ends now." As he spoke, both Angela and Dr. Barrett realized he was far more than just a VIP patient. The authority in his voice and the way he carried himself revealed that he wielded significant power. "Who are you?" Dr. Barrett asked, his earlier bravado completely evaporating. Mr. Edwards smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone who has the power to make or break this hospital's future. And right now, Dr. Barrett, I'm not inclined to support an institution that allows such blatant racism and unprofessional behavior." The gravity of the situation sank in. Angela felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Relief that someone finally acknowledged her treatment, anger at the injustices she faced, and a glimmer of hope that change might be on the horizon. Little did they know, this confrontation would set in motion a series of events that would shake St. Mary's General Hospital to its core, exposing long-hidden prejudices and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The tension in Mr. Edwards' room was palpable as his words resonated. Dr. Barrett's face paled as he struggled to regain his composure. Mr. Edwards, now fully upright, fixed Dr. Barrett with a steely gaze. "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the culture of this hospital, don't you?" Before Dr. Barrett could respond, a nervous-looking nurse poked her head in. "Dr. Barrett, the hospital administrator's looking for you. It's urgent." He glanced between Mr. Edwards and the nurse, clearly torn. finally he nodded stiffly. "We'll continue this discussion later. Mr. Edwards, Nurse Parker, you're dismissed for now." As Dr. Barrett hurried out, Angela found herself alone with Mr. Edwards. The silence stretched heavy with unspoken words. "Nurse Parker," Mr. Edwards finally said, his voice gentler now, "I think it's time I properly introduced myself. My name is Thomas Edwards, and I'm the CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country." Angela's eyes widened in shock. Healthcare United was a powerhouse in the medical world, known for its influence and resources. Suddenly, Mr. Edwards's earlier comments about having the power to make or break the hospital made perfect sense. "Mr. Edwards, Angela began, unsure of how to respond. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair beside his bed. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Over the next hour, Mr. Edwards revealed that his stay at St. Mary's, which was unplanned due to a skiing accident, had opened his eyes to the deep-seated issues within the hospital. "I came here expecting nothing more than quality medical care," he explained. "Instead, I've witnessed a culture of discrimination and unprofessionalism that goes against everything I believe in as a healthcare leader." He went on to describe the subtle and overt discrimination Angela faced, the microaggressions and the toxic culture permeating the hospital. "Your experience, Nurse Parker, is unfortunately not unique," he said, his voice filled with anger and determination. "But it is unacceptable, and it ends now." As they talked, Angela felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since starting at St. Mary's, she felt truly seen and heard,